So tomorrow's the first day of spring, and that means that repotting is coming, but unfortunately for us growers, it also means that there's a lot of pests that start hitting our collection. So about 3 years ago, I had a bad thrips infestation on my entire orchid collection. I didn't have any Hoyas at the time, but now that I have Hoya, mealybugs are a problem. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how I take care of treating my collection and making sure that I nip anything in the bud. I never want to go through what I went through 3 years ago ever again, because it was so much work to get rid of the thrips and it was all over my entire collection. Now, thankfully that hasn't happened again, and I've learned a lot since then in trying to prevent them. So I have a really big collection, so I'm going to show you what I do to nip things in the bud and prevent that stuff from happening. So let's jump right in. Okay, so let's start with the basic thing that you're first taught, usually neem oil. So I don't even measure the neem oil, but I take like a teaspoon and I put in a little spray bottle with soap, a little bit of rubbing alcohol, and then I spray my plants down. Yeah, maybe a teaspoon to like 2 cups of water. I don't even put it down to a science, but never smother too much neem oil. I like neem oil, but it only really works for spider mites if you have like a light infestation. Otherwise, you have to keep reapplying. And also the thing with neem oil is when you treat with neem oil, it makes the leaves a little bit sensitive. So you don't want to use neem oil, then plant back in the hot sun or put it back under lights. This is the least effective method in my opinion. So we're gonna move on to some of the big guns, the stuff that I use when there's more pests, but this is like a nice natural way of taking care of pests if you have pets. If you don't want to deal with any fumes, if you don't want to deal with chemicals, or if you don't have any other alternative, neem oil is a natural repellent. It's less effective than everything else, but I wanted to mention it just because this is what I started with, and I'll say it's mixed results. The neem oil smothers the bugs. Let's say you have spider mites. The soap kind of suds them away, and the combination of the smothering of the neem oil and the soap kind of washes them off, but sometimes there's remnants, so it doesn't always work. So the things that I've gotten on my collection are spider mites. That's probably the most common. Thrips and mealybugs. This is for my orchids and my Hoyas. When I expanded my Hoya collection, I started noticing way more mealybugs because they're mealybug magnets. So I had to get creative and try to figure out how I get rid of them. So the next thing that I did was I got this Naturalite. Now this is Spinosad. That's the main ingredient here, but I wanted to find something stronger than the neem oil that wasn't as toxic to pets. So a lot of this stuff is in like flea prevention for pets. Not that we want to spray our animals with it, but this is something that's not, the fumes aren't terrible. I'm indoors. This is the lightest, most natural thing that I found, and it's not, I'm not putting my bare hands in it, but this is a topical treatment. I've used this very successfully for my thrips infestation. I've sprayed everything down. I take a pump sprayer. I follow the instructions here with the Naturalite, the Spinosad. I pump it and then I spray every plant in my sink. And I found that thrips, they just die right away. Highly effective, topical treatment. It's amazing. With mealybugs, same thing. With mealybugs, I normally put water on the outside of the pot of the plants if I can and spray them off. But sometimes you'll get infestations, and then with the Hoyas, you get root mealies. So they're all the way inside of the pot, and then you can't do that with a topical treatment. So that kind of left me thinking, what can I do? So I actually moved to systemic granules. So in some states, this is not allowed to be sold, which is kind of annoying, but the main ingredient on this is imidacloprid. I'll write it down below. I definitely said that wrong. Imidacloprid. So I started using this and I found it made a huge difference in my collection. And I also use this for orchids. So what this does, this is very different than the topical treatment. So if you have spider mites, you should use a topical treatment because they're not biting into the sap of your orchid or your Hoya. If you use systemic granules, it works a lot differently. So this is absorbed into the plant tissues. So it doesn't kill off anything right away, but the plant absorbs it. And then in the span of a few weeks, as the pests bite into the plants, they get poisoned. So it works completely different. So the difference between this and this is the topical treatment will kill things immediately. This will take time. I like this better because I don't have to spray. I put them in pots, but orchids work differently. So let me talk through how I use this with the orchids. So these are little granules and you put them in the pots of your plants. So normally it's for plants. You just pour them over the soil, and then what it does is as it slowly releases as you water your plant. The issue with orchids is that they dry very fast. So you have to do things to adapt and make sure you're able to use this, because very chunky bark is just going to dry too fast and this won't absorb. So with Hoya, with house plants, you could put it right over the soil. Water is normal and eventually it will absorb. You apply this every 8 weeks. I had mealybugs all over my Hoyas and this worked with one treatment. I didn't see any Hoyas, I didn't see any mealybugs anymore. It was great. But sometimes you get the mealybugs in the roots of the Hoya and then it just kills everything pretty quickly. So this was the only thing that worked. And something like this, although it'll kill the pests immediately, it can't get to the roots. This will kill the eggs. This will not kill the eggs. This actually kills the pests when they bite into the plant. So that's the only other thing. So this is right away, but it doesn't get everything in the roots. This will take time, but it gets everything, even in the roots. For Hoyas, for houseplants, just follow the instructions. Just put it right over the soil and it's gonna work out well. If you have an orchid in sphagnum moss, this will work out well because the sphagnum moss will act like soil. It'll take a while to dry and it will absorb. If you're using chunky bark, what you can do is you can mix it inside, but again, you don't want it to fall through, so that's going to be a problem. So you could take like a tea bag, follow the directions, use only half of the dose recommended for your orchids. Don't put a lot. Orchid roots are more sensitive than houseplants, so just take it easy. You could put in like a little tea bag like this and then bury it under the top layer, and then you could water a little bit, but you also want to start with a plant that's been watered lightly, and then you could water lightly again and let it absorb. Again, if you're using chunky bark or something like that, it might dry too fast. So maybe you could also put moss on top and put the granules over it. With that said, this isn't perfect. This gets moldy. It doesn't do anything to your plants, but I've just noticed over time that these granules do get moldy. Eventually you could flush it out, but when you put it in there for 8 weeks, you're not going to want to do a heavy flush right away because you want it to absorb. So you kind of want it to stay a little bit more moist. So keep that in mind. The tea bag can work well. You just put a little bit, bury it into the pot, and it'll stay there and not fall through. And then you kind of just water around it so the orchid can absorb it. You could also take moss over the top, or if you're using fine bark, it'll work well because it will take a longer time to dry and it won't fall through the cracks. What are the cons of this? I mean, it will take some time to kill the pests, but it's highly effective. This also doesn't really work for spider mites because the spider mites don't get as deep into the plant tissues. So for that, you could use neem oil, which is a more natural version, a little less effective, or something like this. This is Naturalite, which is Spinosad. So this will take time to work, but it'll get everything. So let's say you have like a Hoya or an orchid with like, it's all over the flowers, you know, it's in the folds of like a difficult, like crinkly leaf or something like that. This will get them. Again, the time that it takes to work, topical, immediate. This, it will take a few weeks. So just bear that in mind. This is what I wanted to share because I mean, this was a game changer for me just because I have now maybe 40 different Hoyas, and I had mealybugs on all of them, and a few started dying on me because there were so many root mealies, and I was trying to use something like this and it just didn't work. So I experimented with this and it worked beautifully. And I don't usually get mealybugs on my orchids, but my mom has a lot of mealybugs on her orchids in the past. She's had an infestation and she tried this and it worked really well for her. So I recommend it. Mealybugs are a nightmare to deal with. Like, you think you have them and then they're in the dirt, they're in the roots, they're in like a fold. And you know, once you have a lot of mealybugs, I recommend this just because they're biting into the plant and eventually you'll be able to get them. Superficially, what I do is if I see one mealybug, you could use a Q-tip with alcohol and you could just kill it on the spot. Or I take a jet of water and I could take it off. Like, sometimes I get plants from some orchid nurseries and they have mealybugs, and that's how I deal with it. Like, I just the water thing, but once in a while, when mealybugs spread, they just kind of propagate all over the place and it's just such a nightmare to see. So this will save you. Anyway, guys, let me know if you've used this for your orchids. This is a lifesaver for my Hoyas, and then I just gave it a shot with my orchids and I saw it was effective. But you do have to keep in mind that because we're using bark and because the plants dry a little faster, you have to adapt. This works great with sphagnum moss, or fine bark or a mixture of moss and bark, but you don't want to overdo it. Orchids are sensitive. Just sprinkle a little bit. Use the half recommended dose. I mean, I just put a tiny sprinkle, honestly. For Hoya, you can use more, but orchids are sensitive. So the key is you need to find a way to keep the pot a little bit more moist than usual. You don't want to flush it out right away. And the last thing I'll say is that you don't want your pets near anything like this topically, but also if you are treating your plants with this, that means that your plants will now have this in them. So my cat that I'm looking at right now, she loves to eat my orchids. So my bottom shelves are just full of bite marks. It's really unfortunate for my collection, but that means that I can't use this on those orchids on the bottom shelf, because then this turns my plant, it's poisoning those bugs, and I don't want to poison her. So if you have pets that are biting through your plants, be careful. Don't treat those because this is absorbed through the roots. This is taking on the poison that will kill those critters. So you don't want your animals biting it. Anyway, guys, I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, everyone.